A dome of shattered concrete hangs frozen in the air, chunks the size of buses, suspended mid-collapse, and standing at the center of that frozen storm is a man who has no business being in this world at all. White hair crackling with blue lightning, eyes that have measured gods and found most of them wanting. This is the Paranormal Liberation War, the worst day in hero history, and it just got a new player nobody saw coming. He doesn't know what a quirk is. He doesn't care what a quirk is. He has spent his entire life clawing his way up from not strong enough. And something about this broken, screaming city just told him he isn't the strongest thing in it yet. That's a mistake this world is about to regret making. What if Vegeta, Prince of all Saiyans, the man who trained himself past his own gods, tore straight into the middle of My Hero Academia's darkest hour? Welcome back to Multiverse Saiyan. If you've ever wondered what happens when a warrior race collides head-on with a world built on quirks, this is exactly why this channel exists. Script by Sam Palm, and if you've got a what-if collision you're dying to see next, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe, hit that bell, and buckle in, because Vegeta doesn't do slow burns, he does collisions.
The sky over the war zone did not open so much as it disagreed with itself. For one impossible instant, the air above the ruined district folded inward on a seam no physics native to this world had ever drawn, and through that seam fell a man who had, until a heartbeat ago, been standing in the gravity chamber of a spaceship orbiting a planet that did not exist in this reality's star charts. He came through mid-breath, mid-motion, one fist still cocked from a punch thrown at nothing, and the tear behind him sealed itself with a sound like a struck bell before anyone below thought to look up. He hit the ruined rooftop of a half-collapsed apartment block hard enough to crater it, dust exploding outward in a ring, and rose from the impact without so much as a stumble, because falling from a hole in reality was, to Vegeta, a lesser insult than falling in front of witnesses. He did not know where he was. He did not care, not yet. What mattered, in the first 3 seconds of arrival, was the same thing that had mattered in every one of the 10,000 strange rooms and stranger battlefields his life had dragged him through. How strong is everything near me? And is any of it worth my time? So he reached out, not with his eyes, not yet, but with the sense honed over decades of war, the one that had let him feel Frieza's presence from across a planet's curve, the one that measured a being's worth in raw output rather than appearance. And what came back staggered even him. The air itself was screaming, not literally, though there was screaming, distant and human and constant, a texture he registered and set aside, but the ambient pressure of this place was wrong in a way no world he'd visited had ever been wrong. Power was everywhere. Not concentrated in a handful of titans the way it was at home, where a being like him could count the number of true threats in the universe on both hands. Here it was diffuse, threaded through nearly everyone, an entire species walking around with some fragment of what his own people would have called a bloodline gift, spent as casually as breathing. It should have been unimpressive. A world where everyone had a splinter of power was, by his math, a world where almost no one had enough of it, except 2 signatures cut through that haze like knives through fog, and both of them made the muscles across his shoulders tighten with something he would never, under torture, have called excitement. One was pure heat, a column of raw thermal output rolling off some vast source to the east, disciplined, contained, the kind of power a person had spent a lifetime learning not to waste. The other, closer, to the south, was uglier, chaotic. A power that consumed rather than projected, radiating outward in ragged pulses like something feeding or something in agony or both. It felt less like strength and more like appetite. Vegeta's scowl deepened into something almost like satisfaction. Finally, something worth the trip. He didn't waste time working out how he'd gotten here or whether he could get back. Those were Bulma's questions, the kind of thing that mattered once the more immediate question, is there anyone here who can make me sweat, had been settled. He turned south, dropped low, and left the rooftop in a detonation of displaced air that blew every window out of the block behind him. The city beneath him was a corpse still twitching. He crossed over streets buried under collapsed overpasses, past a school building sheared cleanly in half, as if some enormous blade had passed through it once and moved on. Fires burned in scattered pockets with no one left to fight them. He passed, without slowing, without particularly caring, the shapes of costumed figures locked in combat below. A woman wreathed in what looked like living shadow grappling with something built like a demolished statue. A man throwing hardened fists the size of car doors at an opponent who kept dissolving and reforming out of smoke. Quirks. He didn't have the word yet, but he understood the shape of the thing immediately. Every combatant below wielded some singular trick, some narrow specialty, and built their entire fighting style around it, because it was the only tool they had. It was, in its own way, almost sad. A world of specialists, none of whom could simply decide to be more. He was 3 streets from the source of the ugly, hungry signature when the first interception came. They dropped from above and to his flanks. 5 of them, moving with the kind of drilled coordination that told him immediately these weren't random combatants, but a unit, something organized and briefed and dispatched with purpose. 3 took defensive spacing around what looked like a command point. 2 more, flanking hard, closed the gap toward him directly. At the front of that pair was a man built like compressed iron, skin already shifting to a dull gray sheen as he moved, forearms hardening mid-sprint into something that would stop a truck. Unidentified aerial combatant, the man barked into a wrist comm, voice pitched to carry. No registration, no IFF. Output reading is... A pause, sharp enough that Vegeta heard the hitch in it even over the wind. Output readings pegged the sensor. Command, I need eyes on this now. Vegeta didn't slow down. He didn't need to. He simply let his gaze slide sideways toward the man closing on his left flank, unhurried, the way a king regards an insect that has wandered too close to his boot, and said nothing at all, because explaining himself to strangers had never once in his life improved the outcome of anything. Hold position, the iron-skinned man shouted, and this time it was aimed at Vegeta directly. This airspace is under Hero Public Safety Commission restriction. Identify yourself or you will be treated as hostile. Ah, so this was the local authority. Fine. Vegeta stopped. He didn't drift to a halt the way the flying figures around him did, correcting for momentum. He simply arrested his own motion in the space of a single heartbeat, hanging in the smoke-hazed air with his arms loosely crossed, and looked the man dead in the eye for the first time. Hayato Kurogane, HPSC Field Division, the man said, steadier now that he had a target locked, though something in his jaw had gone tight. Up close, the output reading he'd mentioned was written plainly across his own face. The particular stillness of a professional recognizing in real time that his professional judgment was about to be tested past its design specifications. Last chance. State your affiliation. I don't have one, Vegeta said. His voice was flat, bored, edged with an accent that belonged to no country on this planet, and he watched the words land on the man like a slap, not because of what they said, but because of the sheer indifference behind them. I felt something worth fighting a few streets from here. I intend to go see if it's true. Move or don't. It makes no difference to me. Kurogane's hardened hand curled into a fist. Behind him, one of the other unit members was speaking rapidly into comms. Possible new enemy combatant, requesting immediate command authorization, and Vegeta caught, distantly, the shape of a decision being escalated up a chain he had no interest in understanding. "That something is Tomura Shigaraki," Kurogane said, and for the first time there was something other than procedure in his voice. A warning, almost involuntary, the kind one professional gives another out of pure reflex, even mid-confrontation. You go anywhere near that fight without clearance, you're not a bystander anymore. You're a variable in a war we are barely winning, so either you're with us, you're with them, or you're about to become both our problem. Shigaraki, a name then for the hungry signature. Vegeta filed it away with the same clinical indifference he'd once filed away Frieza, Cell, Buu, labels attached to threats, useful only insofar as they let him keep score. "I am not with you," Vegeta said. "I am not with him. I am with myself, and I go where the strength is." He let the faintest curl touch one corner of his mouth. "If that offends your war, I suggest you find a way to fight it faster." He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned south again, and the moment he did, the entire unit moved as one, Kurogane surging forward, with both fists already the color of gunmetal, clearly under orders now that made the decision for him. Contain first, question later. The first blow came in fast and honest, a straight hardened punch aimed at Vegeta's sternum with enough force behind it, Vegeta noted with something like approval, to have caved in a tank's hull. He let it land. Not out of arrogance alone, though there was plenty of that, but because a warrior who refused every test, learned nothing about the world he'd fallen into, and Vegeta had spent his entire life learning worlds the hard way. The fist struck his chest, and the shockwave of it cracked the air, and Kurogane's face went from grim focus to open shock in the space of a blink, as the Prince of Saiyans did not so much as shift his stance. "That's it?" Vegeta said, and for the first time genuine disappointment crept into his voice, sharper than any insult. "That's your number one hero's response team?" "I'm not the number one," Kurogane said through gritted teeth, already winding a second blow, "and you're about to meet someone who is." The heat hit before the man did, a wall of thermal pressure rolling in from the east, the same disciplined column Vegeta had sensed on arrival, now bearing down close and fast enough that the air itself began to shimmer and bend. Vegeta turned toward it with genuine, unguarded interest for the first time since he'd fallen through the seam in the sky and found a mountain of a man dropping out of a bank of ash-gray smoke, flame venting from his back and shoulders in controlled blue-white columns, eyes fixed on Vegeta with the flat, assessing calm of someone who had personally ended worse threats than this one looked, on paper, to be. "Kurogane report," the man said without looking away from Vegeta. "Unregistered, unaffiliated, hostile to contact. Output off the scale, sir," Kurogane said, falling back a step to give his commander room. "Says he's here for Shigaraki." Endeavor's flames surged, just slightly, the temperature around them climbing in a way that would have made a lesser man take an involuntary step back. Vegeta didn't move. "Then you and I," Endeavor said, low and even, "are about to have a very short conversation." Vegeta felt his own mouth curl, not a smile, nothing so warm as that, but the particular expression of a man who has, after crossing an unknown sky in a world of specialists and diluted power, finally found something worth the effort of standing up straight for. "Good," he said. "Say something interesting then. Or don't. Either way, I intend to enjoy this. The fire came first. Fire Vegeta had learned across 100 worlds, told you everything about the man who wielded it before a single word passed between you. Reckless fire was wasteful, flung wide, burning everything in reach because the wielder had never needed precision, only volume. Frightened fire guttered and flared unevenly, betraying the pulse behind it. But the column that came off Endeavor's shoulders as he closed the distance was neither. It came in tight, controlled, shaped with the specific economy of a man who had spent decades learning exactly how much heat a given problem required and had long since stopped wasting the surplus. It also, Vegeta noted with the clinical part of his mind that never fully switched off even mid-fight, came in hot enough to worry him. Slightly, not hot enough to hurt him. He was long past the point in his life where mere heat troubled his body. He had traded blows with beings who breathed in the vacuum of dying stars. But hot enough that the air a full 10 meters ahead of the blast had already begun to shimmer and thin. Hot enough that the asphalt below the column's path didn't burn so much as it simply forgot it had ever been solid. This was output measured not in explosions but in sustained ruin, a controlled disaster, deployed with a professional's restraint. He let it come, not out of arrogance this time, or not only, but because he wanted, with the same hunger that had once sent him chasing Kakarot's shadow across 100 battlefields, to know precisely what this world's strongest man was capable of, before he decided how much of himself the fight deserved. The flame closed the last few meters and struck him head-on, and for one full second the entire block was lit gold-white, the sound of it a low, continuous roar that shook loose glass and dust from every ruined building within 100 meters. Endeavor didn't wait to see the result. Men who fought at his level never did. They pressed, immediately, because hesitation against something unknown was how heroes died. He surged through his own flame a half-second behind it, one massive fist already cocked, aiming to close whatever gap the fire had softened. He found Vegeta standing exactly where he had been, unmarked, arms still loosely crossed, expression that of a man mildly reviewing a report he'd already read. "That," Vegeta said, and let the words sit in the ringing silence that followed, was better than the last one. Marginally. Endeavor's fist connected a half-breath later, full force, no longer testing, an honest attempt to end this in one blow, and cracked against something that gave no more than a mountain gives to a hammer. The shockwave blew outward in a visible ring, tearing tile from rooftops 2 streets over. Vegeta's feet didn't slide an inch. For the first time, something in Endeavor's expression shifted. Not fear, Vegeta noted with genuine respect, but recalculation, the particular look of a professional discovering that his working model of the fight had just become obsolete and needing, immediately, a new one. "Kurogane," Endeavor said, low, not breaking eye contact. "Fall back. Get Commission Command a live feed, and get every civilian unit out of a 5-block radius. Sir, if I fall back, you're alone against..." "That's an order." Vegeta watched the exchange with something that, on a more expressive face, might have been called interest. There it was. The thing he'd half expected and half hoped not to find in a world this saturated with cheap, scattered power. A man willing to spend his own subordinates' safety without spending their lives. A commander who thought in terms of the whole board rather than the next 5 seconds. It didn't change anything about the fight to come, but it earned, in the ledger Vegeta kept without ever admitting he kept it, a small mark of respect. "Your discipline is wasted here," Vegeta said, uncrossing his arms at last, feet settling into a stance that had ended the lives of men who'd once been called gods. "You've built your whole life around one gift, and sharpened it until it looks like mastery. I understand the impulse. I spent years doing the same. His eyes went hard. But mastery of a small thing is still a small thing. Show me you understand the difference, or this ends in one move. You talk like a villain, Endeavor said, flame climbing, but you fight like something else. So which is it? Neither, Vegeta said. I fight because I am the strongest thing that has ever walked out of my universe, and I intend to remain that way. Your labels are irrelevant to me. Then he moved. He didn't transform, not yet, not for this, because some part of him, honest in the way only real pride ever was, refused to spend Blue's full weight on a fight he suspected. Correctly, he could win without it. He simply crossed the 15 meters between them in a fraction of a second too small for the human eye to properly track, and drove a fist into Endeavor's guarded forearm with a force that cracked the reinforced plating of the man's costume clean through. Endeavor staggered, the first time Vegeta would learn much later that the #1 hero had given real ground in open combat in over a decade, and answered with a full-body ignition, flame roaring up his arms and across his chest in a defensive corona meant to punish anyone who pressed the advantage. Vegeta pressed the advantage anyway. They traded for nearly a full minute in real time, an eternity by the standards of a fight at this level. Endeavor's flame-carving arcs of scorched air through the ruined street, Vegeta's fists finding gaps in guard and geometry that no purely human fighter should have been able to see, let alone exploit. Buildings that had survived the war so far did not survive the collision of the two of them. An already cracked overpass finally gave way and collapsed into the street below in a roar of dust that neither combatant so much as glanced at. It was Endeavor in the end who broke the exchange, not from exhaustion, though the strain was starting to show at the edges of his stance, but from the calculation of a man who had realized, mid-fight, that he was not going to win this on output alone, and needed, urgently, a different question answered. "Why are you here?" he said, flame guttering low around his fists as he reset his stance, buying half a second of breathing room. Not how. Why? You want Shigaraki. Why? Vegeta paused. It was, he would privately admit, a better question than he'd expected from a man built primarily around punching harder than his problems. Because something in this ruin of a city is radiating power that isn't earned, he said. Power that eats rather than builds. I've fought that shape of strength before, in worlds you couldn't imagine, and I've learned one useful thing about it every time. It always, eventually, outgrows its owner's control. I intend to see whether that's true here before your war finishes deciding it for you. Something in Endeavor's expression cracked, just slightly. Not doubt, but the particular recognition of a man hearing an outsider name, in one sentence, the exact fear he'd been carrying since the war began, and telling no one. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. Then louder, flame surging back to full output. "But you don't get to walk through my city and make that call for us." "Then stop me," Vegeta said, and the air around him began, for the first time, to hum. He hadn't intended to go further than this. A warm-up, nothing more, a way to take this world's measure before the real target. But something in Endeavor's answer, in the stubborn refusal to yield ground even against an opponent who plainly outclassed him, had earned a fraction more than Vegeta had planned to give. Blue took him in an instant, hair and brow flooding teal, the aura around him detonating outward in a ring that cratered the street for 30 meters in every direction and sent Kurogane, still 50 meters back on a rooftop with a live feed running, physically staggering from the pressure wave alone. "Command," Kurogane said into his calm, voice gone thin. I need every available unit on this position, and I need All Might's. He stopped himself, throat working, and corrected, bitter and immediate, because everyone in this war carried that particular wound close to the surface. I need whatever we've got that's closest to that tier, now. Below him, Endeavor looked up at the transformed figure hovering in a corona of blue fire that put his own to shame, and, to his credit, in a moment Vegeta would file away as the second mark of respect this world had earned from him, did not run. "All right," Endeavor said, voice rough, flame climbing to its own maximum in answer. "Let's see the rest of it then." The second exchange lasted 4 seconds. It ended with Endeavor on one knee in a crater of his own making, alive, because Vegeta, for reasons he did not examine too closely, had pulled the last blow rather than let it land clean. And with every hero comm channel within the district screaming variations of the same word, unknown, unknown, unknown. Vegeta powered down, boots touching the shattered street, and looked down at the kneeling giant with something that was almost, grudgingly, approval. "You lasted longer than most," he said. "Rest. I have somewhere to be." He turned south again, toward the still pulsing, still hungry signature he'd been chasing since he fell out of the sky, and found, standing directly in his path, blocking the street with the stillness of something that had been waiting, a figure wrapped in severed hands, gray static crawling restless across pale fingers, red-ringed eyes fixed on him with an attention that felt, for the first time since Vegeta had arrived in this broken world, genuinely curious. "You've been making a lot of noise," Shigaraki said, voice a dry rasp. "Looking for me?" "You have no idea," Vegeta said, "how long I've been looking for exactly this." Up close, the hunger Vegeta had sensed from across a burning city resolved into something more specific and, if he was honest with himself, more familiar than he wanted to admit. It wasn't raw power radiating outward the way Endeavor's had been, a controlled column with a floor and a ceiling a trained eye could estimate. This was unstable, a signature that surged and receded in irregular pulses, like something feeding on itself between meals, gray static crawling and retreating across pale fingers in restless little tides. It reminded him, in a way that put a cold weight behind his sternum he refused to name, of the particular flavor of power that came from a being who had spent their entire existence being made into a weapon by someone else's hand rather than choosing to become one. He knew that flavor. He had worn it himself once, a lifetime ago, under Frieza's boot. "You're not one of theirs," Shigaraki said, tilting his head, the hands across his face shifting slightly with the motion. "Not a hero, not commission. I've felt every flavor of power in this war by now, and you're not on the list." A pause, static crackling faintly at his fingertips. "So what are you?" "Someone passing through," Vegeta said, "who felt something in this city worth investigating before it consumed the whole of it." His eyes narrowed, cataloging, the restless static, the sunken stillness of the eyes above it, the specific way the man held himself, like someone perpetually bracing for a blow that no longer came from any single direction. "Your power isn't yours, not originally. I know that shape. I've worn it." Something flickered behind Shigaraki's ruined eyes, not the flare of insult Vegeta had half expected, but something quieter and worse. "Everyone's power came from somewhere," Shigaraki said. "Doesn't make it less mine." "No," Vegeta agreed, surprising himself slightly with the honesty of it. "It doesn't, but it does mean someone, somewhere, is still counting on you staying exactly the shape they built. I'd know. I spent years being counted on the same way before I decided the debt wasn't worth paying anymore." For a long moment neither of them moved. Behind Shigaraki, Distant explosions rolled across the skyline. Other fronts of the same sprawling war. Other heroes and villains locked in struggles that had nothing to do with the two of them. Overhead, 3 hero units held position at a wary distance per Kurogane's relayed orders, not engaging, waiting on a call from higher up a chain that had, in the last 10 minutes, lost every model it had for what engage even meant against a variable like Vegeta. "You talk like you want to save me," Shigaraki said finally, and something in his rasping voice curdled toward contempt. "Everyone who talks like that ends up trying to lock me in a box instead." "I don't want to save you," Vegeta said flatly. "I don't care what happens to you. I want to know if what's under all that decay is worth fighting, or if you're just another vessel some greater coward is pouring power through from a safe distance." His stance shifted, weight settling, the air around him beginning once more to hum with contained pressure. "So show me. Stop wasting my time deciding whether I'm an enemy, and show me what you actually are." Shigaraki's hand rose. The static didn't crawl this time, it poured, gray light spilling off his fingers in a widening corona that turned the cracked asphalt beneath him to fine sediment in an expanding ring. The decay Quirk finally unleashed at something closer to its true scale rather than the rationed, careful applications Vegeta had felt from a distance. It was, Vegeta noted with real and immediate respect, a power with no theoretical ceiling at all, a quirk that didn't overpower matter so much as it simply revoked its right to keep existing. That kind of power demanded to be taken seriously. Vegeta obliged it. He didn't transform immediately. He wanted, with the same perverse curiosity that had made him let Endeavor's opening blow land clean, to see how far Shigaraki could push this without support, whether there was a person under the ruin or only the ruin itself. The answer came fast, and it came ugly. Shigaraki surged forward on a burst of raw physical speed, not enhanced by his primary quirk, but by something layered beneath it, some secondary edge stolen or granted that let him close distance like something unspooling rather than running, hand outstretched, decay pouring ahead of his fingers like a blade made of erosion itself. Vegeta twisted aside with a fraction of the effort the dodge should have required, close enough that the passing edge of the decay field brushed the fabric at his shoulder and turned a 2-inch patch of his combat suit instantly, silently, to drifting gray dust. He looked down at the small, ruined patch of fabric with something that was, for the first time since he'd arrived in this world, genuine and unguarded alarm. That, he thought, would not have grown back on contact. "There it is," Shigaraki rasped, something almost like delight cutting through the dry flatness of his voice as he registered the shift in Vegeta's expression. "You felt that. Good. Everyone should feel that, at least once." "You're going to regret making me take you seriously," Vegeta said, and the humor was entirely gone from his voice now. He went blue without further ceremony, the transformation detonating outward in a ring of azure light that staggered every hero holding position at the block's edge, and this time he didn't hold anything back to see what the enemy could do. He'd already seen it. He believed it. That was enough. The exchange that followed tore 3 more city blocks apart in under 90 seconds, Vegeta's fists moving faster than the decay field could track and lock onto, Shigaraki's power spreading in wide erosive arcs that turned cover, debris, and eventually the very street beneath them to fine drifting sediment, both combatants operating at a scale that made every hero unit watching from a wary distance go, one by one, entirely silent on comms. It was Shigaraki, in the end, who found the opening no one, least of all Vegeta, had expected. A faint, low, and almost clumsy, drew a dismissive block from Vegeta's forearm, and the moment contact landed, Decay poured directly into the point of impact. Fast enough and concentrated enough that even Saiyan physiology, even a body that had shrugged off attacks that cracked planets, felt something give, a numbing wrongness spreading from the point of contact up through muscle that had never once, in this fight or any other, failed to simply obey him. He tore his arm back a half-second later, the decay field losing purchase as he broke contact, and looked down at a forearm gone thin and gray at the edges, not destroyed, but genuinely, undeniably touched, the first wound of the entire fight that his body wasn't already quietly repairing. Shigaraki went still, staring at the damage with something that was almost reverent. "So you can be hurt," he said softly. Vegeta flexed the damaged arm once, testing it, and felt cold satisfaction slide in behind the pain, because a wound, to a man who had spent his whole existence chasing worthy opponents, was not an injury. It was proof. "Good," he said, voice low and utterly without fear. "I was starting to worry this world had nothing left to teach me." He didn't retreat. He didn't call for backup he had none of. He simply reset his stance, aura climbing higher, and said the only thing that had ever mattered to him in a fight worth having. Again. The wound didn't slow him. If anything, it sharpened him. Because pain, to a man raised on Saiyan pride, had only ever been proof that a fight had finally become worth remembering. Shigaraki came again, decay trailing off his fingers in wider, more desperate arcs now, the delight in his ruined voice curdling into something closer to obsession. He'd found the one crack in an opponent who should not have had one, and something in him, starved, Vegeta suspected, on some deeper level than simple combat hunger, refused to let that crack close again without testing it to its limit. "You said you wanted to know what I was," Shigaraki rasped, static climbing his arms in restless waves. "This is it. This is all of it. No one's ever made me show this much." "Then you've been fighting the wrong opponents," Vegeta said, and drove forward. He'd adjusted. That was the difference between a warrior and a weapon he'd learned across every world that had ever tried to kill him. A weapon repeated the strike that worked once. A warrior made certain it never worked twice. He no longer offered contact points for the decay to seize. His strikes came in glancing, redirecting, forcing Shigaraki's reach to overextend into empty air rather than flesh, each near miss costing the villain a fractional cumulative toll in a fight already running hot enough to burn through even his considerable reserves. The two of them tore through what remained of the block in a blur of blue light and gray static, and it was here, with both combatants fully committed, with neither watching anything but the other, that the rest of the war caught up to them. Kurogane's voice cracked over every hero comm in the sector at once. "All units fall back to containment perimeter. Belay that, belay that. We have confirmed contact from both League leadership and this unidentified. Command is calling it. We are not engaging. We are observing and preparing containment nets for whichever one survives." "That's not a plan," someone answered, tight and furious. "That's just watching them level the district for us." "It's the plan we've got," Kurogane snapped back. "Nobody currently deployed can touch either of them. You want to change that math, radio in, and tell me who." No one did. Because there was, in this moment, in this war-ravaged corner of a city, already bled white by months of escalating conflict, genuinely no one closer. It was Endeavor, still kneeling in the crater Vegeta had left him in, flame guttering low but not out, watching the blue-white and gray-black collision tear apart the skyline 3 streets over, who made the call that would be studied in commission debriefings for years afterward. "Belay containment," he said into his own comm, voice rough but steady, hauling himself upright against the pain still radiating through cracked ribs. "Get me eyes on League command structure. If Shigaraki's fully committed to this fight, then for the first time in this entire war, he's not covering his own flank. A beat. Then, from a commission liaison 3 channels over, careful and disbelieving, you're suggesting we use the anomaly as a distraction. I'm suggesting, Endeavor said, that whoever that man is, he just did more damage to the League's cohesion in 10 minutes than we've managed in 10 months. I don't know what he wants. I don't think he's ours. But right now, today, he's fighting Shigaraki harder than anyone alive has ever fought Shigaraki, and I am not going to waste that by getting in the middle of it. It was, Vegeta would learn much later and regard with something close to genuine respect, exactly the calculation he would have made himself. The fight ended not with a final decisive blow, but with exhaustion arriving from 2 very different directions at once. Shigaraki's decay, pushed far past whatever threshold he was accustomed to sustaining, began to falter, not fail outright but stutter, gaps opening in a field that had, minutes earlier, been seamless. The strain showed in his ragged breathing, in hands that trembled now between bursts rather than simply reaching. Whatever reserve fed that hunger had a bottom, and he had, in his obsession with the one man who'd made him bleed in months, driven straight through the careful rationing that had kept him alive and ascendant through an entire war. Vegeta, for his part, was tiring in a way he hadn't in years, not from Shigaraki's raw output, which for all its horror remained a fraction of what he'd traded blows with across the multiverse, but from the specific, grinding vigilance the decay Quirk demanded. A single careless contact and an arm became dust. That kind of fight cost more than strength. It cost attention, sustained at a razor's edge, for minutes that felt like hours. They broke apart at the same moment, several meters between them, both breathing hard in the settling dust of a district that no longer resembled a city so much as the memory of one. "You're not going to win this today," Vegeta said, and there was no triumph in it, only flat assessment. "You've burned through more than you can afford, chasing one fight you didn't need to have." "Neither are you," Shigaraki said, static flickering weak and uneven now across fingers that no longer fully obeyed him. "You're not from here, you said it yourself, so why does it matter to you if I win this war or lose it?" Vegeta considered the question with more honesty than he offered himself credit for. "It doesn't," he said finally. "Not the war, not this planet's politics or its commission or its heroes and their labels." His eyes, teal and hard, held Shigaraki's ruined red ones. "But you asked what I was looking for when I fell out of the sky, and I'll give you an honest answer. I was looking for something worth being afraid of, for the first time in longer than I'd like to admit." "You gave me that today. That's worth something. Not loyalty, not mercy, just worth something." Shigaraki laughed, a dry, broken sound with no real humor in it. "That's the strangest compliment anyone's ever given me." "It's not a compliment," Vegeta said. "It's a debt. Remember it." Then he turned, aura still crackling faintly around him, and left the League's strongest kneeling in the wreckage of a district neither of them had come to defend, because the fight, for today, had reached the only honest conclusion a fight like this could reach. Not a victor, but 2 combatants who had finally found, in a world neither fully belonged to, an opponent worth the scars. Behind him, hero units began cautiously closing the perimeter as League reinforcements pulled Shigaraki back under cover of the chaos. No one moved to stop either withdrawal. Everyone present understood, without needing it said aloud, that they had just watched something the war's careful planning had never accounted for, and that whatever came next, the balance of this conflict had shifted in a way no one, hero or villain, yet fully understood. Word of what happened in that district spread through hero networks and league channels alike within hours, fragmented, contradictory, retold by people who'd only caught the edges of it. A man made of blue fire who'd put the number one hero on one knee and walked away smiling. The stranger who'd fought Shigaraki to a standstill and called it a debt, not a victory. Within the commission, entire task forces were reassigned overnight, chasing a variable no existing classification could hold. Within the league, whispers moved even faster, edged with something between fear and reverence. Vegeta wanted none of that noise. He found a quiet ruin at the war's edge, sat with his back against a half-collapsed wall, and let the ache in his damaged arm settle into something manageable while the distant sounds of a conflict that wasn't his continued to roll across the skyline. He hadn't come to this world to save it. He hadn't come to end it either. He'd come because something in the fabric between universes had torn, and he'd fallen through, and somewhere in the wreckage of a war he owed nothing to, he'd found exactly what he was always looking for. In every world, in every fight, in every year since he'd first sworn never again to be the second strongest man in any room. He'd found someone who could make him bleed. Above him, the sky remained sealed, offering no promise of a way home. And for the first time since he'd landed, Vegeta found he wasn't entirely certain he minded.